All right. Good morning, Dr. Richards. How are
Dr.
things with
Leib,
you?
doing well.
How are things at More Than Movement? What are you guys up to over there?
We're slowly growing, getting ready for a transition to a new facility in Northern Liberties from Fishtown in probably the coming month here. So gearing up for that.
Very, very cool.
But otherwise, all good. Trying to stay on top of my own training
Nice.
and my own health. And yeah, just a lot of walking around the city I've noticed
Really
recently.
nice.
But yeah. But what about yourself? How are things moving professional? What's happening there?
Yeah, go well, steady. It's kind of same old, same old. Right now, I'm preparing for a powerlifting meet, which is different for me. So, like, I'm doing a lot of volume with the powerlifting movements. So,
Mm-hmm.
getting my body to recover from that because I'm getting a bit older now. So it's fun to kind of challenge myself in that way, but I definitely have to really, walk the walk when it comes to the recovery side of
Yeah.
things, where it's like I've kind of gotten to the point where I know how to do recovery. I know how to like do mobility and fit it into my day. But now when I add all this volume in, it really makes me have to say, okay, like this is where I need it because I could see my performance deteriorate or just
Mm-hmm.
like not be able to get the reps in the way I want to get them in if I don't have
Yeah.
that recovery side of things. So,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, I like to mess with these accountability checklists that I put up, and I find that they become really helpful when I have some type of competitive goal because it starts to integrate things like sleep, exercise, obviously, but also my nutrition and other behaviors that I just want to be able to structure because we have to be able to manage all of these balls in the air, right? Being a business owner as well as like trying to have some activity, competitive goals, and things like that. And that's what we do for a living too. So like anything we're doing from a movement competition standpoint is really just education for us to, I think, get better at our jobs. But it's to me, it's at this point, it's gotten really obvious that it can't just be one thing at a time, right? Like you actually have to focus on several things at once in some way, but be able to balance all those things. Otherwise, you're not going to be as good at the thing you're actually trying to optimize.
Yeah. No, I feel like there's that talk about the interference effect, and I think it's
Mm-hmm.
a real thing, but at the same time, I think you're still able to train multiple qualities at once to actually probably enhance the main thing you're trying to improve. So in your case, like the big three,
Mm-hmm.
squat, bench, dead, and powerlifting. But yeah, I feel like I haven't done a competitive powerlifting meet, but when you're when you're under the bar that much, things are going to start to get a little cranky, and that recovery piece probably becomes so much bigger. When's
Yes.
the meet?
The 29th of this month, so the end of this month. Yeah, and I think like being a recreational athlete is quite a bit different than being like a legit competitive athlete. That's
Definitely.
what you're doing from a specialization standpoint, right? Like I almost choose these competitions as just a framework for behavioral control, as I like to think about it. So like you can't do everything all the time, so it kind of gives you a guide of what to prioritize. But I wouldn't be prioritizing it as much as if this was like my full-time job or I had
Yeah.
sponsorships or things like that. So I still want to be doing other things that would absolutely be from a physical standpoint an interference effect. But I think like when we're talking about behaviors, there's actually like having more behaviors that are for your health are almost the opposite of interference. Now it becomes
Yeah.
aiding in your process, right, for recovery and being able to get you to do more of what you have to do. So it
Definitely.
is this interesting dynamic, and I think a lot of us in the fitness space are here. Like we have our main job is actually working with clients, and we're making money that way. But we are exploring recreational competitions to really have a better understanding of maybe some of the athletes we have to work with, but also just the how to build physical attributes that we want to build in our clients. So we aren't going to be at that high upper echelon, but we still want to get the best we can out of ourselves while we're balancing all of those other things.
Yeah.
And not letting go of some of the other things we enjoy. So I still want to be able to do jujitsu, a couple times a week, and I got to, spend time with my kids. I'm certainly not going to deprioritize that, but I want to make
Yeah.
sure that at least with my training, I'm putting more focused towards the competition. And when that's over, I might forget about that type of training for a while and totally switch gears.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Festivus games at all?
Other than the name, not really. Like, I don't know the details.
It's basically like it's kind of like a CrossFit without it's like a very novice CrossFit competition. Like, I think it's really a lot kettlebell based, but I just got basically volunteered to compete in that in a few weeks. So
sweet.
That'll with like a team of 2 others. So yeah, I haven't trained. My training recently has been a lot of like some speed and power work, and then hypertrophy work on the other end with kind of lower level conditioning. But I need to start messing around with getting my skill and kind of feel back with the kettlebell a little bit more.
Right.
But it should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going in a little underprepared, but it's okay.
It's good. A little bit of good assessment. See where you are, as long as you don't kill yourself.
Yeah.
You know where the term Festivus comes from?
Oh, Seinfeld. Yeah.
Okay. I know we're quite a bit different in age there. So that I grew up with that, but I don't know that you did. So, but I guess that lives on.
My brothers are obsessed with it.
Right.
They're older, and so I grew.
That's right.
I feel like I've seen it like 100 times, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was the whole language, I feel like, in my generation was either Seinfeld or Friends, right? It was like you're quoting Seinfeld and Friends, and I quickly realized that not everybody speaks that language, especially when I got out of my hometown and I started trying to make references to that, and people were like looking at me like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, not everybody talks that way?
Yeah, my brothers and I will have conversations that are still just quotes of Seinfeld.
Right.
So,
all right, good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we can speak the same language then.
Yeah.
All right, so today I think we're going to segue from our discussion of the movement continuum, where we were really trying to break down how we assess movement and then eventually treat it or train it, to now going more specifically into movements that we would be training. So today we're actually going to be a little less structured and just talk first about a category of movement called non-exercise activity, or in non-exercise activity, thermogenesis is often in the research, or NEAT, as a way to, thermogenesis would mean how you burn calories through movement that isn't so much purposeful in the gym exercise, but just the movement that you're naturally doing throughout the course of the day. And noticing the variations from person to person in that can be a big difference. So although we're not actually following the direct definition here, if we're talking about it and we're making the movements a little bit more purposeful, I think the conversation is still a good one to talk about how the research looks at breaking this category down. And as physical therapists, what we're doing a lot is we're giving people, we're giving our clients exercises to break up their day, right? Because a lot of times what brings on symptoms for people is sitting too much, standing too much, doing too much of your day without variation. So we can also think of this category of movement as how do we provide variation to your static positioning throughout the course of the day, just to add a little bit of movement. So I think this is actually, this should be a really important discussion. It doesn't necessarily seem like a fitness discussion, but I do think there's a ton of value here, even if you are someone who's quite active, because the research does show that even if you're, active 2 hours a day at the gym, there's still a downside for sitting for 8 hours throughout the course of the day, or sitting too long. From a longevity perspective. So even if we do have a nice regular practice of exercise, we do have to figure out how to move more throughout the course of the day when we'd otherwise be still.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. So to structure the conversation a little bit, we can talk about what the research tends to look at. They break down this non-exercise activity category into 3 subcategories, one being ambulation or locomotion, just walking for the most part. As bipedal creatures, we walk, so when we locomote, but we can also think of it as just different ways to get around, right? So if you're not walking on 2 feet, or if maybe we look at it as if you're just going from point A to point B and you're cycling, it's just this exercise or this activity that would not be part of your normal purposeful exercise. So just how do you travel around the neighborhood, right? Like, do you walk there? Do you take a bike, or do you take a car, right? Obviously, if you bike or walk, you're getting more activity in than if you're driving. So that would be one category. Taking the stairs versus the elevator, that's another part of that category. Variations in body posture would be subcategory number 2, which is really just changing your position more frequently. That's the way I look at it. And this will segue into a conversation we'll have later on about the value of getting up and down off the ground. But this is more broad and just change your position more frequently, change your body posture more frequently. So if you're sitting for long periods of time, being an active sitter can be helpful, but also just going from sitting to standing more frequently, purposely, or having some type of idea of like, all right, I've been sitting too long. Let me just stand up and I'll work on my desk and standing. And then I'll go back and I'll work on my desk and sitting. Maybe I'll go to kneeling, and work at the computer and kneeling, and just varying that up as much as possible. And then the last thing is sort of like a catch-all for everything that's not the first two, which is just fidgeting. And the way I like to look at fidgeting is, and we'll talk about different ways that we can categorize that, but it is really just trying to, whatever position you're in, you don't have to actually change your body position, but just move within that body position. So if you're sitting, like shift your hips a little bit. I like to give people upper body movements while they're sitting, because your arms are free, and just getting in the habit of having, finding ways to move when otherwise you'd be still. Mm-hmm. Do you have any feedback on that from like what you've seen so far with yourself or with clients?
I've just noticed actually, like in terms of NEAT, and I guess I alluded to this earlier, but like I think environment plays a really big role into how much you're actually moving outside of exercise. Like I've noticed just since living in the city for a few years, it's like I'm walking so much more, and it's just baked into my day, versus during COVID, I was living out at my parents out in the suburbs, and it was like I had to purposely go out and go on walks, versus now it's just like to get to anywhere I want to go, it's a walk for the most part, or a bike, or if it's really far, I'll drive. But like it's almost driving is actually like an inconvenience in the city, because you got to park, you got to like, there's just more to it than actually just walking, getting somewhere. But I think in the research with walking too, in addition to actual health markers of longevity and the benefits of walking for that, and generally non-exercise activity, there's, in terms of like weight loss and weight maintenance, I think that there's actually a lot pointing to, you're going to burn more calories in your non-exercise activity throughout the day relative usually to your exercise activity, but getting, I think steps tends to be a really big measurement for how much you're walking, or just like a general idea of non-exercise activity. And in the research that's backed up to actually getting in that 7,500 to 10,000 step range, there's actually some benefits of it regulating your hunger a little bit more. Yes. Whereas when you're under that, hunger can kind of spike and drop a little more irregularly with your body. So that's another benefit in addition to the calorie expenditure and other health markers. But walking is sort of the biggest one, I think. And then I would say in my personal life, and you would probably, I would think, agree, like in this kind of hybrid setting of coaching and physical therapy, like you end up pretty much fidgeting and moving all day.
Right.
And it's another way it's just baked in for us, versus I think it's important to help our clients troubleshoot, who are maybe more desk bound or have to be more sedentary due to their work, how to actually bake that into their day a little bit more. And you have more experience with that than I have, just with more years under your belt. Again, not to date you at all, but more wisdom there. Be curious kind of how you think about all this, and then how you work with your clients to potentially increase this or have discussions around this topic.
Yeah, first off, I agree with you, and I think the discussion about step counting, I think, is important, and I think it's often underestimated in the fitness space, just because it seems like it's, that's below me, right? Like I'm doing things that are way more intense than that. I'm burning more calories, right? I'm lifting heavier weights, but it's really a nice metric to just pay attention to see like how your body wants to rest when you're not doing that purposeful exercise. Like what's your natural amount of work that you do or activity that you do, right? Because it really does change, like you said, depending on your environment. And I can give my personal example is I started monitoring my steps because I did have a weight loss goal. This was years ago when I was going to be climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. And for some reason, this was a bad idea, actually. But I wanted to lose weight to do that because I really didn't know how to train for that, other than I knew I was going to be in altitude. But I thought, all right, well, it's going to be a lot of time moving. So I was just like, it's probably better that I would be lighter. Well, that actually might not have been the best idea just because there was a lot of elements with weather and things like that, or it might have actually been better to have a little bit of fat on me. But anyway, the process of going through it was I just got my fitness pal. I started tracking my calories. And then I found that it was easier for me because I already did have a nice activity practice that, all right, I'm going to be able to eat more if I get more steps. So I just sort of did that type of calculation, and I started really paying attention to my steps. And I noticed that because my job is really active, like I'm always up with my clients, moving things around. I'm moving weights for them. I'm putting weights back, that I would get like 15,000 steps just in a day without purposely trying to get more. And that's on my longer days, where some days I do have like 12-hour, 13-hour days. So by the end of the day, I'd be like, yeah, I got like about 15,000. And then it became easier for me to get more. I could just like be pacing while watching TV, getting on a trampoline, doing different things. But as soon as COVID hit, like you said, and I had to be on Zoom all the time, I was getting like 2,000 steps. Yeah. Right, like all day. And I had, a similar day as far as hours. And, so many things changed there. But that was one thing I noticed that, okay, it was really hard. I had to like fidget while trying to be on a computer to try to get any type of steps. And my whole being changed, right? Like there were times where I just felt like I was going to explode if I didn't get off Zoom. Like I just felt like so bound up with energy. I had to start wearing like blue light blocking glasses because my eyes were getting really annoyed and sensitive. It was just a really different experience. And it was cool to kind of experience it. I didn't like it at the time, but now I really do see the difference in just being able to move around naturally. And the step counter gives you that awareness, gives you that feedback. So I do think that's useful. And for clients that were new to exercises, which a lot of our clients are, that we can't just throw them right into some type of really structured program. So one of the best ways to get them to start moving more is just have them get a step counter and pay attention to their steps and say, like, what's your baseline? Is it 2,000? No judgment. Just let it be what it is. And then just do a little more, right? And that could be huge because they don't have to be very structured with any type of program. It's just paying attention to that. Just wear the watch. And we'll go from there. And that's oftentimes a really good starting point.
Yeah. No, it really is. I think too, it's just like, yeah, I find with clients the getting too structured off the bat with things outside of potentially what we're doing in person or like one day outside of it. It's too much and it kind of overcomplicates it and probably makes the barrier to entry a little bit too high. Yeah. Especially coming off no real history with exercise or athletics or training. And that's it's a tough thing versus like just being like, all right, let's see where you're at. And I think actually in the research too, like the majority of Americans are sitting around 5,000 steps on average a day, or under that. And that'll vary by region, I think, and environment, depending on jobs. There's actually, I think, some interesting studies on the Amish out in Lancaster and how their diets are actually really high in calories, but for the majority, like they're moving all day, right, and then they're doing a lot of times more kind of manual based work all day, and their actual health markers are really good. Right. And it just shows the power of non-structured physical activity.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we also have to digress from that a little bit and say, okay, like when that's not our environment, we don't have to like judge our environment as being evil. It's just like we have to have some mindfulness around what are we not getting, right? That's part of the assessment too. Like, okay, what are we doing for ourselves that's healthy, but what are we not getting from our environment, and how do we add a little bit back in?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what this discussion really is, like, of non-exercise activity. So, and it's really to me a behavior and an initiation thing, like hygiene, right? Like we take showers and we brush our teeth. I got young kids, and it's, you know, surprisingly hard for them to want to take showers and brush their teeth early on in life. Until as they get a little bit older, it just becomes more natural. Yeah. But like for most adults, when that becomes something you've done for a long period of time, that's time consuming, but it doesn't seem hard, right? Yeah. Well, that's how I think of the non-exercise activity, is like we just have to find ways to make it the norm, and then it becomes the norm. It doesn't become too much effort, right? This is not supposed to be intensity in any way. This is supposed to be just, okay, I'm watching TV, let me sit on the ground. I'm watching TV, let me be up instead of on the couch. And it's just the switch of going from, I don't have to really change that much. I just have to decide not to get too comfortable for too long in the same position. Yeah. Or with work, I think when there's more of a focus mentally, we have to just have some type of reminder to say, okay, I've been doing this position too long. I could keep doing my work, but let me do it in another position. And I have to remind myself of this all the time, especially with again, more Zoom stuff now, is I could do a standing desk. I could do a sitting desk. I could get my mat out and sit on the ground. Like, to my clients, there's no different. And I'm actually a lot more alert if I'm on the ground, like mobilizing my hips. Just that idea of like reminding yourself to change positions more frequently. It's not hard, but there is a diligence to it that is necessary. And it's oftentimes that get the ball rolling type of mentality that's the hardest part, because it's really easy to just get comfortable in the same position and try to really like segregate or separate out your day into buckets, where it's like, okay, well, here's me sitting at a computer doing work. I'm going to do that for as long as I have to do. And then when that's done, I'm going to go exercise. And that's going to be that bucket of movement. And then when that's done, now I'm going to go on the couch and watch TV, because I've already done my exercise. So I feel good about that. Right. And like, so we do have to be a little bit more diligent in the way that we think about changing things up more frequently throughout the course of the day. And that can be hard for people.
Yeah. The talk of changing position speaks a lot to just movement variability, which I think also ties back into, well, health and longevity at one point, but also as an extension of that, pain, and how when people are in pain, I think they tend to lose a like actual movement variability and different paths about which to move. And I think getting some of this non-structured activity, changing body positions, and getting the ball rolling with that, like you said, is actually probably one of the better ways to gain and retain some mobility without necessarily doing some really targeted work. And I mean, in there too, you can always bake in some targeted like mobilization of the hips or whatever it is. But even just like, I think we've had talks in the past about the importance of assessing ground sitting positions, and that actually just getting on the ground is one way to start potentially opening up some more options or paths for which your body can move, as opposed to just feeling like it has one route and that's the only route it can go.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you think of the basic principle of use it or lose it. Like, I think that is everywhere, but we don't often take that into account when we're looking at the variability of movement. We'll think, all right, are we active or are we not active, right? Like, we'll have that as this kind of like binary yes or no. But that does, if we are active, but we're active in doing the same things all the time, we are not necessarily using a lot of things. We're using the same patterns over time. So there's still a lot being lost in the things that we're not doing. So to me, movement variability is one of the most important things to keep in mind. And there's a couple different ways to look at movement variability. So in the research, I think it's often looked at as not this just varied movement throughout the course of the day, but more, if you have a certain task that you want to complete, being able to complete that task in more variable ways is very useful for performance, right? And I know we've had this conversation before about athletes who, the best athletes in the world, have a lot of variability in the same task, right? They can, a basketball player can have their body position be in a lot of different ways and still eventually finish the shot exactly the way they want to and make it go in. But they don't have to be shooting a foul shot from 15 feet straight on every time to make their shot. They can be at all these different angles. And you can think of every athlete, most athletics are that kind of varied position, and you still have to know what the goal is, what the task is, and be able to accomplish that, but you have to be able to do it at various angles all the time. So movement variability has that component to it, where it actually is great for performance. Like for end game high optimal performance, you need a lot of variability, but it's also could be what we're talking about here for health, is that we want to try to think about varying as much as we can. And that does not mean be random with our programming either, right? Yeah. I think there's a difference there where it's just that, well, if you're 2 days in a row, you're doing the same exercise, then, well, you're not being variable enough, you're going to hurt yourself. No, like I think within structured exercise, we want to be oftentimes doing the same movements so we can see ourselves getting better at them. Mm-hmm. And we want to have a plan for that. Like we need to be able to see this progressive overload in some way with the same thing. So we shouldn't vary up too much within a certain program, or really have a good plan for variation there. But it's outside of strict structured programming that we actually want more variability. We want to be more aware of what we're doing too much of. Yeah,
I agree. How do you sort of talk with your clients who might work a desk job or for whatever reason aren't able to, are coming from a place of less of this movement, and maybe they are working during the day, kind of more of a sedentary job, and that's kind of a constraint for them? How do you kind of talk with them to structure some of this movement variability, non-exercise activity into their days?
So one of the things is, like, I'll start from what their biggest complaint is, and I'll make the eventual fidget be something that's connected to the activity that they're having trouble with. So if somebody comes in and they have pain in their back with sitting, then we can start with, okay, well, you do have to sit for a while. So how can we sit differently? Like, so it might just be the discussion of, can we use like some support to elevate your butt a little bit higher while sitting? Can we get your sitting environment more optimized? That might be the first start. That's variation right there, right? Mm-hmm. Adding some support to sitting, or a change in how they're currently sitting is variation. So that might be step one. Step two would be, let's give some type of movement that you can do within your sitting posture to vary the stress that's causing the pain, right? So if it's sitting, first maybe you elevate the hips. Now I might give somebody some type of hip shifting exercise. Depends on what somebody can do while they're sitting, or maybe some type of stretch where they cross their leg and it feels good. It changes the variation, or it gives a variation to the stress that's causing the pain. Maybe a lot of times I'll just have people use a pinky ball or one of those like massage balls, and just have it with them, and they can put it on their chair if their chair has a back, so that the pressure of the ball is varying up the stress, right? Like, so if you think when you're sitting in a chair, gravity is always working down on you, the chair is sort of working up on you, so there's this compressive load. If you take a massage ball and you put it and you sandwich it between your back and the back of the chair, well, now that's creating a pressure from back to front. So that varies up the pressure, and you can move that around wherever. It doesn't have to be just where it hurts. Oftentimes I tell people, like, probably the last place you want to put it is where it hurts. That's maybe that feels good and gives you the most direct relief, but you also have the most opportunity to make things worse by doing that there. And the goal is not to massage out the pain. It is to vary up the load, vary up the pressure. So move it wherever you want, be variable in how you move that pressure around your body. So that's one of I think the best ways to actually vary load, or vary position, pressure, etc. And then that becomes a segue into, okay, let's use this massage ball, a foam roller, just to vary your position. It has nothing to do with all of the other mechanisms of like releasing fascia and all that. Like, I'm sure that happens, but I think the most important part is that you're using all of these interventions to have someone change their position more frequently. And a lot of times that what feels like exercise that's directed towards somebody's complaint gets them to vary their position more often, right? So I think that's important, is that you don't just tell people to like change their position more frequently. but you tie it into something that feels meaningful and useful, at least at first.
Yeah.
And then what becomes meaningful and useful might be just vary your position more.
Yeah.
Right. But at first that might not make sense. Right. It might be like, no, I want this pain to go away. So like I need to be doing something that feels like it's directly helping my pain.
Yeah.
So I think that pressure therapy idea of, whatever, self-massage, that really, as long as someone feels like they're in control of it, is a really good way to get people to change position more frequently.
Yeah, and just psychologically connecting the dots for them too, between what you want them to do and what they want.
Yeah, and it sounds like trickery, but it's really not. It's just like meeting people where they are and understanding, trying to understand psychology and behavioral change somewhat. And that's part of our job, whether it was in the formal education or not. It's like we're working with people, we're working with asking them all the time to change behaviors. We better get better at behavioral change, right? Like we better get better at the psychology of that, or we're sort of just being assholes. What I mean? Like we're just telling people to change, but we're not really understanding the science behind that change. Yeah. So I think it's really important for us as professionals to really understand that, so that we can be a little less heavy-handed and kind of meet them where they are a little bit more.
Definitely.
So I mean, I think that's a good side. This is an ongoing topic, no doubt, but it's really just general. It's just like try to vary your position a little bit more frequently. And it is, in many ways, when I look back at everything I've done as a physical therapist, this has always been really a cornerstone of physical therapy. Is we're trying to give people exercises that we tell them to do short bouts frequently throughout the course of the day. Yeah. And it's maybe behind this idea of we're trying to work around their injury or get something stronger that's close to where their pain is. But I think really the most beneficial thing about physical therapy exercise that's done in this short bout frequently routine is that it gets people to change their position more frequently. And I've tend to make my language promote that more than the idea of why are we doing this? We're doing this because we have to get your hip stronger because it'll protect your hip when you put weight through it. That might be true, but I tend to say, well, it's just going to change your position more frequently because you're telling me that what's provoking your symptom is this position. So I need you to do that less often. So I almost look at it again, it fits into this movement continuum idea of a position that you're in too long is endurance in a way, right? Like you don't have pain right away. You have pain after 10 minutes. Well, 10 minutes is the limiting factor there, not the position, right? Like you could do the position. There's just a time limit that you have for it. So we have to respect that time limit and have you be able to vary your position more frequently. And maybe then that'll allow you to sit there longer so that we can, build that time frame. But ultimately what we need to do is find a way for you to be in that position longer, right? We could try to change the structure. We can try to, change your tissue quality so you're more resilient to the position longer. But another piece of that is your body's telling you something. It doesn't want you to sit there that long. So find another thing to do, but still be able to do the task you want to do. And that is probably the most direct way to make a change to the symptom.
Yeah, definitely. It's like great exposure to everything, and then in a way progressive overload with just gradually doing more over time, but staying within the bounds of what someone's safely able to handle and tolerate.
100%. All right. So next week, I think we'll dive a little more specifically into movement, and we'll start talking about some movements that I think are the biggest priority for longevity, or whatever you want to call, whatever durability, longevity, just living healthier longer. But they do look like high level fitness after a while too. So we're going to touch on just the idea of getting up and down off the ground next week, which is a nice, segue from what we were talking about today, because it really does help you vary, but we'll talk about it more from a structured, purposeful exercise standpoint next week.
Cool. Awesome.
All right. I look forward to it. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.